Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see so many familiar faces and some people that I might not have met before. If you don't know me, I am Hannah Wiley. I'm the Network and Knowledge Coordinator at Film Hub Scotland, and it's lovely to welcome you to our Access Forum today on film screenings for neurodiverse audiences. I'm delighted to welcome Hannah Murray from Spectrum Film Club today, from Western Bartonshire. I won't give too much of an introduction as they'll have plenty of time to tell you all about themselves this afternoon. There will be lots of time for chat. We hope it'll be an interactive session, so please don't be shy. And if you have any questions at all throughout the afternoon, then please just raise your hand or jump in, and Hannah will be happy to answer any questions that you have. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to other Hannah.
Thank you, Hannah. It's going to maybe get a bit confusing. Hello, everyone. I've got some slides to share with you, if that's okay. I'm not really used to using Zoom, so bear with me. Hopefully it will be quite straightforward and Hannah can maybe help me if not. But you can just sort of shout at me if you don't see what I hope you're going to see. We'll just get started with this if that's okay. Can everybody see that? All right, my slides. Good, some thumbs up, perfect. So yeah, thank you so much for having me along. My name is Hannah. I'm gonna talk you through some ideas around creating positive experiences for neurodiverse audiences, which is a bit of a mouthful. But yeah, the whole idea really today is getting us thinking quite practically about your own events or opportunities that you run, and thinking about how we can try and make them a wee bit more inclusive. Here we go. So this is kind of a bit of a breakdown of what the next couple of hours is going to look like. So I'm just going to start off with a bit of an introduction around the idea of neurodiversity and what it means to be neurodiverse. And then there's going to be a question after that. And so I'll come out of the slides and we'll have a bit of a time to kind of share answers and things. And then we'll come back into number 2, the kind of 6 steps to inclusion. That's a bit of a meaty chunk to get through, which if we'd had maybe a bit longer or we're in person, I would love to have been really practical with you, but I'll try and make it as interesting as possible, but you have to just sort of stick with me. And once I get through that, and again really looking at sort of how we can sort of be a bit more practical and thinking about being more inclusive, then after that we'll have questions. I think, again, I'm not so sure how Zoom works. I hope if you have a question and you put your hand up, I'll be able to see it. That doesn't always happen on Teams, which I'm used to using. So again, just shout at me if you have questions throughout, but there will be a time, a kind of chunk of time after we've gone through those kind of 6 steps to ask questions. And then hopefully allow time for maybe a wee sort of 5-minute water break or pee break if you need. And then Hannah's going to help me pop you into some breakout rooms to have a bit more of a discussion about your own opportunities and what events you run, and you'll have a chance then to sort of introduce yourselves and maybe share a wee bit about what you already do or what you're hoping to do within your opportunities that you run. And then at the end, I'll get us all back together just to share the screen, hopefully for not too long, but I have got quite a few resources that I'm going to share with you after this. Some are mine that I've made to kind of go along with what I'm going to be talking you through, and some are just other resources from really useful places to kind of get you thinking, and I'll be sending those on, or Hannah, I guess, will be sending those on afterwards. So hopefully we'll have a wee bit of time at the end just to go through those so you know kind of what I'm talking about. So we'll just get started if that's okay. So about me, that's me. I think sometimes it's useful at training to kind of know who the person is that you're talking to and why they're there. So my name is Hannah Murray. I am it's crazy, about 10 years ago now, I got a master's in autism. So I was really fortunate to be able to go on a course at Glasgow, at Strathclyde University, to study autism. And so that's kind of a real interest of mine. And throughout the years, kind of before and after that, really, I've done sort of various support worker roles and things sort of directly supporting people with autism and their families. And now my role, I started my job, not new anymore, about 3 or 4 years ago. It's hard to tell with the pandemic of timelines, because there was a long time of things just sort of blurring together. But for the last little while, I work for local authority, doing a number of things for autistic people and people with learning disabilities, and doing a lot of one-to-one work and work with the families. But a big chunk of the job is either introducing people to local social groups and activities that they can access. And if those groups don't exist, a big part of my job has been creating new ones. So we've created quite a few of different social groups. So we've got things like a women's group, a gardening group, and a kind of sci-fi and anime and manga group. Lots of different things, but my sort of wee baby that I was working on throughout lockdown, and the reason why I'm here today is to talk to you a little bit about the group that I'd set up called the Spectrum Film Club. So I'm probably coming at it from a bit of a different angle than some of you guys as well, and hopefully that'll be quite good. That'll mean we've got some different stories and things to share with each other. I'm going to start by telling you a bit about the Spectrum Film Club. Oh gosh, where to start? So we were lucky to get some funding from the Cinema Equipment Fund to get some cinema equipment to start off this group, because we didn't have any equipment, which is probably quite important for setting up a cinema group. And of that, the funding came through right before the first lockdown. So we weren't able to really get going with things for quite a while, which was a shame. But then in kind of the opposite way, it was quite good, because we had quite a bit of time to sort of plan and get ready for launching. The whole idea behind the Spectrum Film Club is we meet once a month at Kilmerdinny House in Bearsden, sort of on the Bearsden-Milngavie border in East Dunbartonshire. And the whole idea is that it's an inclusive film night. Part of the reason where the Spectrum Film Club idea came from was in the whole of East Dunbartonshire, there's not a cinema. And so it's a really rural and spread out area. And a lot of the people that we were kind of meeting and working with were sharing that for them to go to the cinema, it was quite a bit of a journey to get into Glasgow. Public transport isn't that great across the authority. So being able to actually physically get to a cinema could be difficult. Aside from kind of skills that a lot of our people might face some difficulties with, like independent traveling and being able to get around without a parent having to give them lifts. So kind of just practically, that was a real barrier for them, as well as a lot of the kind of inherent barriers that are put in place for some of our people when going to a bigger cinema like Cineworld or View. And we'll talk about those in a second. So I'm going to ask you in like 5 or 10 minutes to think about some barriers that a neurodiverse person might experience attending the cinema. So you've got that in your minds. I'm not going to go into it too much just now, but there are a few barriers that are sort of inherently naturally there for people attending the cinema. And we just found that as a result of that, loads of our people just weren't getting those opportunities. So we wanted to make a really inclusive event for them to come. And one of the really sort of key elements of the Spectrum Film Club that I think makes it quite special is right from the very, very beginning, when we had the idea, we kind of have done everything from the very beginning with the influence of a committee of autistic people. So we put a bit of a call out for local autistic residents and their families that if they wanted to sort of be involved in creating an inclusive film night. And we were in lockdown then, so the meetings happened over Teams. Unfortunately, that was a bit of a shame in some ways, because we couldn't just get together and do things more practically, which is always better. But it did mean that we could have people from other sides of the authority who might have not been able to come anyway. And we had quite regular meetings, just really for me to sort of run things by them and get their opinions and really find out what they would want from a cinema night. And then maybe I would go away and work on a little thing and then take it back to them and get their opinions, and kind of would sometimes give them tasks to do if they wanted to. They didn't always want to, which was totally fine. Sometimes it was just a nice way of getting together and having a discussion, and we talk about what films we've been watching over lockdown and our favourite films, and it was quite a nice way to get everyone together. And then they would probably also say that one of their favourite parts of being on the committee was they also picked all of the films that we were going to be watching. So just out of interest in terms of sort of thinking about programming, and this was just something that came from our group. I'm not saying that's going to happen with every other group, but was the type of films that they picked was just quite interesting to mention, I think. So when we started in January last year, I should have said. We were able to start in January, and my whole kind of vision was we would have a different genre of film every month, just to have a bit of a range of things that we were showing. So I'd sent the committee out this template, and it sort of said, well, let me know what your favourite films are. January could be action, and February could be rom-com, then all the way down, trying to cover as many different genres of film as we could. And that was fine, and they all gave some really interesting suggestions, and luckily we were able to kind of narrow down a short list and pick their favourite films. And then as the year went, I really noticed that we didn't have as much attendance or interest in a lot of the more kind of actiony and sci-fi films, which I just thought was interesting, because I thought those might have been quite popular, but just over time we realised that people just didn't have as much interest in that. And so what we did this year was I just said, right, you guys just tell me what films you would want to see. The only thing that we ask is that it's as close to an hour and a half as possible, just so we can kind of stick to the same rough finishing time for pickups and things, and it doesn't eat into the evening too much. Obviously there are films that are a bit longer than that, but we try to keep it quite close to that as possible, and we ask that they're family friendly films. But a really interesting thing that came out of that was almost every film that they picked was from the 90s or 2000s, and that's sort of without any input from us. So we've got the kind of screening list included things like Jumanji and Space Jam and Men in Black. The next film next week we've got it on is Clueless. So I just think that's interesting. I'm not saying you should all go away and just immediately only screen films from the 2000s for your audiences, but in terms of thinking about programming, that's something that I didn't really expect to happen, I suppose, and just naturally that's just come over time. So they really love being involved with picking all the films, and as we've gone, they've been really helpful in looking at any resources or adaptations we make and giving their feedback throughout. So that's the idea behind the Spectrum Film Club. What I'll do at the end when I show you some of the resources, if we've got time, I'll show you the webpage. We have a webpage, and it's just, if you just Google search the Spectrum Film Club, it'll come up, and there's information about every the movie that's on that month, as well as a bit of a blurb about the film and a trailer for the film. And we also have some resources, hopefully to kind of prepare people for their trip, so they kind of know what to expect. We'll get into this and some of these examples later on, but I'll if we have time, I'll show you that at the end as well. And just before we move on, I should mention this guy that I've got on the screen. This is Projector Pete. We asked one of our people who came. He's really talented. He has this skill where he'll just sit and draw all these superheroes, and honestly we've honestly got hundreds just at our office. I think his home must just be full of them, and he just sits and draws these superheroes, and they've all got these amazing powers and skills and kind of tools that they use. And so we went to him and said, can you please make us a mascot for the Spectrum Film Club? So he drew us Projector Pete, who has a projector for a hand. That he's not holding it, that's just what his hand is, which probably would have come in handy, I think, actually, when I was setting up the group at first and had no idea how to use any of the tech. I really could have used Projector Pete. But actually, we'll talk a bit later on about being able to adapt and change. And we actually very recently have had to put Projector Pete to rest and not use him anymore because he was really scaring one of our audience members. We had a picture of him on the projector as they came in, and there was a picture of him in a big speech bubble, and it said, "Welcome to the Spectrum Film Club. The film will start at 5 p.m." And that was just it as a kind of welcome screen. And it really terrified her, and she wouldn't come in the room. We couldn't figure out why for so long. And now we've realised it's Projector Pete. So, you know, RIP Projector Pete. You might see him on some things, but he'll be maybe getting phased out over time. Just quickly before we go into our first sort of discussion, but I just thought it might be useful to have a bit of a think about what we mean by neurodiversity, because that's sort of the whole theme of what we're going to be talking about today. I know I've mentioned that I sort of mainly work with people who have autism, but I should say as well that the Spectrum Film Club is open to anybody who's got any additional support considerations. And it can be really useful to, as a bit of a starting place, to sort of think about what do we mean by neurodiversity. So just to kind of introduce it a bit, you might have heard, it's a bit dated now, but you might have heard of the medical and the social models of disability. And these were both theories that sought to essentially explain disability and why people were disabled. Like I say, it's quite dated. But the whole idea where neurodiversity is kind of rooted from is within one of these theories. So the medical model of disability, it basically sort of, this is me very much paraphrasing, I'm not very good at describing these sorts of things, but basically the medical model of disability essentially says that if you are unable to do certain things, that is because you have a disability, and that was how you were born. And because you have a diagnosis of something, that just means that you won't be able to do certain things. And I hope that you're all sitting there feeling quite outraged hearing that, because it's pretty terrible. The whole idea of sort of looking at people who have any sort of disability as you know, as just naturally not being able to do things, it's quite negative. Whereas the social model of disability really is kind of where this whole idea of neurodiversity came from. And it looks a bit more at, well, if somebody isn't able to do something that they want to do, that is because society naturally just puts up barriers. And it's the fault of society and the way that the world works and the way that people kind of naturally are that means that some people can't be included. And it kind of puts a bit more of the focus on us as, okay, well, how can we support this? How can we help this? Rather than focusing on and thinking that people just can't do certain things, putting us more in the kind of mindset of thinking, well, what am I doing, or what is my event doing, or my movie night, or what naturally within this could be creating a barrier for people, and what can we do to try and get rid of some of these barriers? And I think it's much more of a sort of positive view towards looking at finding solutions and working towards a society and a life where people don't naturally feel like they have barriers to being able to do things that they want. It says here, there's no right or wrong way to view the world, and that's really linked to where neurodiversity comes in. It's that the word itself, neuro is brain, and diversity being different. People just have different ways of experiencing the world, different ways to view the world. People are just different. It's not looking at things that people can't do, and well, you were just born that way, so that means that you just can't do certain things. It's actually normalizing the whole idea that everyone's just different from each other. There's not a right and a wrong way to do things, and what we need to really do is look at how we can break down some of these barriers that might be in the way of some people being able to take part. I like this quote. It says that a diagnosis shouldn't constitute a barrier to inclusion or access. So I think that's maybe something that when we talk about neurodiversity or being neurodiverse people, getting to the root of what that actually means doesn't always get discussed that much. So that's kind of where I wanted to start us off today. And this really underpins a lot of what I'm going to talk about in the training today, is just thinking about, you know, people just experiencing things in a really different way and have different learning and access needs that we need to try and be able to accommodate as much as we can. Also, just a really interesting fact, I think, that it's estimated that about 15 to 20% of the global population are considered to be neurodiverse, which might come as a bit of a shock to you, I'm not sure, but I think that's quite interesting. Just lastly, before we go into the next question bit, is just again to kind of highlight what we mean by some of these conditions that come under this umbrella term of neurodiverse. So you might have heard of autism being a neurodiverse condition. We've probably heard that quite frequently, but there are some in here as well that you might not have thought of so much. So things like ADHD, dyscalculia, dyslexia, dyspraxia is one in there as well, although that's not on the picture. And things like Tourette's and fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. There's a few things in there that really come under this umbrella of being diverse, and I'm not going to go specifically into each of these today. That's not really why we're here, but I just wanted to highlight trying to really think a lot more positively as any of these things not being anything that people are just lacking in certain areas or struggling with certain areas. It's people just experiencing the world very, very differently, as we all do. Every human experiences the world differently anyway. So hopefully that's something that can really underpin a lot of what we think about today. I know I've been speaking for a little while, so what I'm going to do is stop sharing the screen, and I'm going to ask you if you could put your wee hand up thing, if that's okay, just so we don't have everyone shouting over each other. But just to sort of get us thinking as a bit of a starting place for before we get on to the strategies and how to kind of overcome some of these things, thinking about what are some of the barriers that neurodiverse people might face when attending a cinema event. I've tried to keep it open, not just specifically folk about film screenings. It could be festivals, it could be anything that you guys are involved in. But yeah, what are some barriers that some people might face? I'm going to stop sharing. Oh, I've just seen also, hang on, a question from Irene as well. Sorry, that didn't pop up when I was talking. So now we know. You can give me questions and I'll pick them up later. But yeah, I didn't see that before. Irene, just to answer, Irene had asked, what is the average age of the Spectrum Film Club members? And they are, I'd say the average probably being in their 20s and 30s. People I work with are over 14 specifically, but the Spectrum Film Club is open for any ages. So hopefully that answers the question. Sorry, I wasn't ignoring you. I will come back to the questions once I'm not in the slides. Emma, you're going to come in, so what some barriers?
Yeah, I was just thinking the first one would be accessing clear information about the event and how the event is going to unfold, and just having clarity around what to expect. Yep,
that's a huge one. That's actually going to be a big chunk of what we talk about, so that's good, you're on the right track. Thanks, Emma. And Sarah's put in the chat as well about sensory overload, lights, sound and crowds, busy spaces being a barrier too. You're totally right, Sarah. Anyone else?
If it's the same, sorry, hi everyone, you don't know. If it's the first time they're attending the cinema, for instance, and they're not familiar with the venue itself, not knowing where things are, like if signage is not good, for instance, like where the toilets are, and like box office, like where everything is located. So just that fear of, I wouldn't call that, fear is probably not the right word, but just the anxiety around the unknown.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Yeah, you're right. I think there's a few things touched on there that about sort of what to expect before you go, and then what to expect when you actually get there. I think you're totally right. I know there's some things in the chat, I'll go through those in a second, but David, you've got your hand up as well.
I say, following on to the last one, the layout of cinemas, modern cinemas can be very confusing. and also the lack of staff. So the lack of people to help, and if you do need any support or any help with anything, there's most modern cinemas, there's lucky to see MD from the point you come in sometimes. So, and the way ticket scans and stuff like that is very impersonal.
Yeah, you're right. The layout of the cinema, I actually went to the cinema a couple of days ago, and I found it really confusing to figure out what the aisle was and what the seat was, and they're all laid out totally differently. So I think, yeah, you're right, David. That is something that is important, and also lack of staff. Something we'll mention as well is about sort of visibility of staff sort of later on, how to make that a wee bit easier for people. So yeah, thanks, David. There's a few things in the chat as well that I'll read out. So Siobhan had said about getting restless during the film. Again, that does come up for quite a few of our people. And actually not just people who've got autism. Needing to sort of move around can be important. Triggers, content triggers, that's a really important one from Amaya as well, about thinking about what's going to come up in the film. Being mindful, especially if you're programming, of what's in the film, and being able to warn people of some triggers beforehand. Irene said yes, that's like a good one for Irene. She knows what you're talking about there, Maya. And again, that comes up in the resource that we'll be able to share later on too. Sarah had said about having a space to stim freely. That really links into maybe being restless or not being able to move around as much. So if you don't know what stimming is where you might see there's loads of different kinds of stimming. But in terms of what I think we're mainly talking about here is people maybe needing to move around, so that you might see people some sort of rocking back to forwards, shaking their hands. You can get really small stims as well. People stim in totally different ways, but these are things I think particularly maybe during a cinema that might come up. Siobhan said talking to strangers. That's a really interesting one, and I think you're totally right. I do a lot of autism awareness training, and within that I talk about a lot of the hypocrisy of sort of teaching people, again, people with autism, but it could be anybody really, about sort of social rules, and saying to people, well, you shouldn't talk to strangers. But then going into an event, maybe speaking to somebody at the ticket desk, somebody showing you to your seat, somebody walking around with you, that can be really difficult and jarring for some people. Sort of goes against what they've been naturally taught that they should be doing. So yeah, you're right there, Siobhan. And again, that might link into identifying who staff are, so to know the right people to be able to actually speak to. And David said film length too. That was a big one for us, and it kind of limits some of the films that we're able to watch at Spectrum Film Club, but it means that we kind of know that our films always start at 5 and they're done sort of 6:30, 7:15, so folk can get home and have their tea and sort of go about their evenings, rather than worrying about how long it might take into their night. And also for us to parents who drop them off and pick them up, again, that could be a factor in terms of how long people are able to actually give. Another one, Emma has said, a lack of breakout space. That's a really interesting one. So we'll mention that later on. Luckily, we were able to offer that at the Spectrum Film Club. You might have heard of a breakout space. They do it quite a lot now in sort of supermarkets and leisure centres and things. It's basically a separate space away from everything that's going on. It's a bit quieter, and ideally it would be sort of low arousal. It wouldn't have big bright lights. It would be quite quiet, quite calm. Luckily we were able to do that at Spectrum Film Club, and we've got a room, and the room's actually, it's not great for it, to be honest, but it's better than nothing. It is a spare room that if people are feeling overwhelmed or overstimulated during the film or during the event, they can just go somewhere away that's a wee bit quieter. And we have things like sensory toys to maybe kind of help relax people, and there's different sort of strategies that you can use. But again, not everybody has that ability. So again, we'll talk later about what you can and can't do. And I'm not saying that if you don't have access to a breakout space that you have to go and hire an architect and go and build one. There's just a lot of these things that won't be possible, that we will sort of cover as we talk through the next bit. But that's loads. You've given some really good ones. Is there any more before I go into the next bit? Okay. Now we know as well, I'm not going to see your messages while I'm in the slides, but if you need to ask anything or say anything during it, please just do it. It's quite informal here. Also, if you need to nip off or go to the toilet or take a call, I should have said at the beginning, that's absolutely fine. So what I'll do, so for the next bit, this next bit's the kind of chunky bit, so stick with me. I'm already a bit annoyed at my own voice, so I'll try and keep it reasonably brief, and then at the end we'll have a bit more time for questions and discussion. I'm hoping that a lot of what will come out of today is in the discussion and folk getting together and sharing your own stories and things with each other. But I will go back into my slides. Hopefully you can all see this. So what we're going to talk about now is my sort of top tips for how to try and be a bit more inclusive. I should mention as well, I was having a chat with Hannah before this all started about, I know you guys have really different backgrounds and you're bringing different experiences to this training. And there are some people who run cinema nights and there are some people who run festivals. We're going to talk a bit about hopefully the kind of whole experience of everything. But I am aware as well that some of you, maybe if you run festivals, you might not have access to your own venue or, a kind of regular space that you're always going to use. So again, hopefully we can still kind of keep this in mind, but there'll be other things for you as well. I should say for us at the Spectrum Film Club, we have a room in a building that we rent off the people once a month, and the rest of the time it's used for mainly weddings and other things. So I know what it's like to maybe not always have the same setup and the same kind of experience every time you go, but hopefully this will be something that we can all relate to a bit. I've tried to break it down into 6 steps, and I should also highlight that what we're going to talk about, we're kind of considering a neurodiverse audience, but I would argue that these sort of things can just be useful for any audience, and also just can be useful for any event and not necessarily just a cinema event. You can hopefully apply these things to a lot of different situations. Just personally, I don't consider myself to be neurodiverse, but I can be quite anxious in new situations and where I don't really know what's going to happen, and I really like to know in advance where I'm going to be or what's going to be expected of me or where can I park, and I like to have information in advance anyway. So some of these strategies that we're talking about being useful for a neurodiverse audience, I would argue can just be useful for anybody in general. And then you've also got things like younger audiences or older audiences, and hopefully we can apply these tools to those situations as well. So step number 1, if you were going to consider how to start thinking about being more inclusive, number 1, I would say the best place to start is getting to know your audience, and really think about the target group that are going to be coming. You can do this in loads of different ways. One way that I think can be really useful, if you don't already kind of know a bit about who might be coming, just do a bit of research. Get on Google and just learn a bit about some of these conditions or some of the things that might be really present for people who might come. So using autism as an example, a lot of people just really know a lot of the stereotypes about autism, but not really some of the details about some of the commonalities experienced by people. So for example, people might not know that now, to get a diagnosis of autism, sort of inherent within, to be able to get a diagnosis, the person has to present with some degree of sensory differences. And I know that some people might associate sensory things with autism, but actually people might not know that that's inherent within getting a diagnosis, and would be really important for some people. Also things like anxiety. I after all my experience of working with autistic people, I don't think I've ever met anybody who doesn't also experience anxiety to some degree. And again, just being able to learn some of these things and think, all right, well, maybe some of my people might be anxious, and that's just not something that you would ever think of necessarily. In terms of other sort of conditions as well, someone very close to me personally at the moment is undergoing an assessment for ADHD, and as part of him trying to learn what that is and what that is for him, we've been learning about it, and it's really opened my eyes to actually, I don't think I really had a clue actually what ADHD was until we've been looking into it. That I had maybe just kind of assumed that it was a hyperactivity and you know, needing lots of movement and things, and there's so many other elements to it that we're now learning are part of that I think can just be really important to take a bit of time. Doesn't have to be ages. You don't have to go away and, you know, get a PhD in it or anything like that, but even just 10-15 minutes of thinking about your target audience and what people might be bringing with them when they come. I would argue that one of the best ways to do this, as well as do a bit of research if you can, is ask them and involve them wherever possible. We were very fortunate that we were able to have a committee. Our committee at the beginning had about 13 people. That's largely because we were stuck at home in lockdown and we were able to jump on a video call. Over time, we don't have as many as that are kind of regularly involved in the decisions and the kind of committee roles, just because now people are busier with work and college and school and these things. So that might change over time, who can and can't be involved. You don't have to have a committee. I know everybody also has different sort of time limitations and kind of capacity and things like that. But even if it's one person, even if you know one person that you could ask them to be a bit of an advisor, or, you know, be able to kind of give you some tips or feedback on things when you're kind of planning things or in the early stages, that would be brilliant. But also things like surveys, you know, feedback boxes. There's so many different ways that you can make sure that your audience's voice is heard. Again, I would also argue that's not specifically important just for a neurodiverse audience. With any sort of event, it can be really useful to ask people what they would like out of it. But just to get started, I think really putting yourself in the kind of mindset of who's going to be coming would be really, really helpful. The next bit, and this is the bit that I think I was going through the slides earlier, and it's quite difficult to just explain it, but I'm going to be giving you a resource, and I'll talk you through it later on, which explains this in a bit more detail and sort of practically how you can do it. But I would say that a really useful place to start with for thinking about how you can be a bit more inclusive is break down your event. Really think about your event from start to finish. The resource that I have made that I'm going to send you, I called it a full event scan, which I know sounds really dumb, and I probably could have thought of a better title for it. But I was kind of thinking of a full body scan. You know how you might go to the doctor and you just get everything checked out and everything to see how it works. Do that with your event from start to finish. And at this stage, we're not thinking of any of the barriers that might come up. We're not thinking about adaptations or solutions at this stage, but just at the very, very beginning, live through what is going to happen at your event right from the beginning. So how do people find out about it? That was mentioned earlier as a barrier already. How do people know that it is even on or that it exists? How can they contact you? How do they know what to expect? Again, I would argue that's one of the most important things to think about. And at this stage, you'll see in the resource, it's just practically what happens. What are you able to do? What with the kind of limitations available to you, what happens? It's quite useful for us in setting up the film club and thinking about, you know, do we need for them to reserve a ticket beforehand, or can they just come? What happens from the start right to the end? To kind of, I've put how do they get home there, just because I've mentioned where we have our group is a really rural area and public transport isn't always that good. So thinking about if bus services or train services have stopped by that point. I think one of the buses where I work finishes at 6 or something. So just if that is something you might need to think about, or if there is parking charges, when do the parking charges run out? Just trying to pick it apart as much as you can. I know it might seem a bit scary, but hopefully that will make it a wee bit easier down the line. And giving feedback. We'll talk about these things a bit more in detail anyway, but I would suggest a really useful place to start, whether it's a cinema event or a festival, practically just breaking it down, writing things down can be so useful, just to kind of take stock of everything. As part of that, I would also suggest, this is kind of 2.5, that you also think about the sensory experience. So if you can, walk through the venue, walk through the event, think about the sensory experience, and kind of in every single way. So for example, for sound, you know, thinking even about, is the venue somewhere where I used to live, there was a bread factory next door, and every 2 minutes there was just this noise of this machine stomping all this ingredients for the bread, and it was a nightmare. So just think, is your event near somewhere that's noisy? Is there music on in the foyer? Is there, if you go to the toilet, are the hand dryers really noisy? Walk through the whole event and even think about during the film, how loud do the speakers go? A lot of films, you know, the talking's really quiet, and then the kind of noises are really quiet. So then you make it a bit louder, and then you can't hear the talking. I'm always sitting, if we're ever watching a film at home, I'm always putting the volume up and down on the telly. Drives my partner crazy. But these sorts of things to think about during a film, what actually happens. Sight, smell, I've put in proprioception too. That's to kind of get you thinking a bit about kind of the space. And it can be quite common for a lot of autistic people anyway to experience their sort of relation with objects differently. So if you've got kind of furniture in the way, maybe they might walk into the furniture, they might trip over things. Thinking about your space, is it really cluttered? How close are the seats next to each other? Where do they put their belongings during the film? Just at this stage, just doing a full kind of recce of what happens. Again, there's a resource for this with some examples that I'll share with you later on. But I think just to really get us started thinking about practically what might people experience. From then, this is the kind of biggie, and I'll be sharing things that will hopefully make this a wee bit easier. Once you've got everything broken down into smaller chunks, you will, I would hope, sort of naturally be able to recognize for some people if any barriers come up, or they might experience any sort of difficulties with anything. And that's when you can kind of take apart each different section, each different element of your event and think, well, can we make any adaptations here? I really want to make it clear that it's okay if the answer is no. It's okay if you're not going to be able to make any adaptations at every single element. It's just not possible. There's a few things that we would have loved to have been able to put some adaptations in place, and we just couldn't, either because of the venue or our capacity or time or money or whatever it was. You're not going to be able to do everything. But what you might find by breaking everything down is realizing that there might be some places where you can make some adaptations that you hadn't realized before. And hopefully it makes it a wee bit easier for you to see, to kind of see what might come up for people. Look online for tips. So I'm going to send you some resources I've made afterwards, and there's some really brilliant ones online. There's a really, really brilliant one that was made with the UK Cinema Association and the National Autistic Society, which properly was a game changer for me in setting up the Spectrum Film Club. I'll link it. It's in the slides at the end, that I'll send you a link to it. And it has loads of it said it's to prepare for autism friendly screenings, but I would say they're for any sort of neurodiverse screenings or just screenings in general, really. And it breaks every element down, and it lists loads of potential adaptations. That even me, you know, I have a lot of experience of working with autistic people, but no experience of supporting people within a cinema or film event. So there was a lot of things that I thought, I don't even know what adaptations I could make. And what you might find with having these resources available to you, if you've got everything broken down, you could look at something and then kind of cross-reference it with these resources and be able to kind of cherry pick. And that's kind of what I did, you know, for example, with something like your the noise in the cinema. I might look at that and think, I don't really know what I could do about that. And then look at one of the resources and go, actually, yep, I can do that. And you might find it's a lot easier than you think. So I'm not suggesting that you have to go away and spend ages on it either, because I know time is very precious. But being able to sort of take things apart a bit at a time, and then think of, right, what can I do at each step that might break down some barriers and make it a bit more accessible. I'll give you some examples of some things I've done for the Spectrum Film Club. And there's a wee bit more of this, and then we're going to go into sort of questions and discussions. So just some examples for things for the Spectrum Film Club. So there's a few. I'm not going to talk about them all because it'll maybe bore you, and like I say, I've been talking for ages already. But just some things that we were able to do that were quite useful. So if you think about the second one there that says, how can they contact you if they've got any questions or worries? This came up quite recently, that on our webpage we have an email address and a phone number to phone if you need to speak to anybody before you come. And we had a mother, she called me about maybe 3 weeks ago, and she basically had said that she'd always wanted to take her daughter to the cinema, but her daughter had quite complex needs, and there was a good chance when she went to the cinema she would maybe walk around, move around a lot of stimming, like I'd mentioned before, and she was kind of worried about taking her to a mainstream cinema event just because of what other people might think, or if people told her off, and so she really wanted to know how we could maybe support that within our group. And I was able to explain to her what adaptations we've already made within the Spectrum Film Club, but I also was able to sort of say to her, okay, well, let's think about what we can do. And again, this is part of it, is kind of always being open to try new things. And we're talking about it for a while, and I said, would this work, or would this work? And we've come to the agreement that what we're going to try, so hoping to come to the next one, so I'll have to wait and see, but we're going to try setting up at the Spectrum Film Club, we've got kind of blocks of seats, and then there's a big gap at the back of the room because they have to keep a big section of the back of the space free for fire escapes. But there is the potential to have a row of seats at the back. And so I suggested that we make a row of seats at the back, and this person can sit in the centre so she can see straight down the aisle, get a perfect view of the screen. And if she wants to move around, she can get up, and she has the whole area at the back that she can move around as much as she wants. And we also have like sensory toys and things that we can give her as well. And I've suggested that we try it. It might not work, it might work, it might not, I don't know, we'll have to wait and see. But hopefully that is something that will get rid of some of those barriers for her and her mum in being able to attend. And her mum had said if she hadn't been able to speak about it beforehand, she wouldn't have come. And actually, I think for her, just being able to speak to someone that says, well, that's okay if she moves around, don't worry, or we'll figure it out together, and just having someone to talk to for that sort of positive reassurance, I think, was really, really helpful. So I would suggest, where possible, being able to speak to someone before they come as much as they can. And also, this was mentioned before about how people know what to expect. This, I would say, would maybe be one of the more important things to consider where possible, of how to know what to expect. And that, again, could just come from having someone to speak to if needs be. But we thought about this a lot for our group, and what we've done is, you'll see on the web page, although they take a long time to open, it's really annoying. The council have a really slow server, so you click it and it takes a while to open. And I have put a wee thing on the website to say, bear with me while this opens, because I promise it will open, but it's just not as quick as we would like. But available beforehand, people can go on the website, as well as getting information about the film, and like I say, there's a blurb and a video. We also have a walkthrough video of the space. So it was just me doing it on my iPhone, nothing fancy. I've got very limited tech skills, but we'd set up the fun club before the first screening, and I just walked around. So you can kind of walk in through the main door, you can see where the desk is, you can see where the toilets are, you can see how the space is set up, and we put wee captions on it just to tell people to know what things are and just what to expect. We also did a picture version of that. So in a Word document, we have pictures of everything. that people can print and take with them if they want. So it would be a picture of the entrance and say, this is, you go in the front door, and then a picture of the next door and say, turn left. And it's just a walkthrough of what to experience that they can print and take with them. We also have a floor plan, so people can see the floor plan of the whole space. I know that was mentioned by someone too. We were able, again, I made that on Microsoft Word. It's the most basic thing. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. But again, that's a bit of information before coming. And also what we did, which I think could be quite useful for people, is we have a list of how we have made this inclusive that could be quite useful. So again, if somebody has gone to an inclusive cinema night somewhere else, for example, if somebody goes to the Access Film Night at the GFT in Glasgow, they have a lot more resources and capabilities because they are a kind of functioning theatre cinema that runs regular cinema events. They've got staff, they've got budget, so they will be able to offer more than us doing it in a village hall with not as much time. So it can be really useful, I think, for people to have a list of what you have done at your event, just so they know not to expect certain things. And then if they can see a couple of things on that list of what you have done, that might be enough for them to feel comfortable going. So I think anything that you can do to prepare people for going would be really, really useful. Just a couple more and then I'll try and round this off for this part. Something that I should mention as well about what happens before the film. It's really, really common in a lot of inclusive cinema events to not have trailers. Because trailers, it can just be a bit of a distraction, it can be extra sitting time, it can be quite confusing as to, well, we've come to see this film, so why am I watching these other things? So we don't have trailers. However, what we do have, one of our members, one of the founding members actually of the film club, and he was one of the main reasons why we started the film club, is him and his family are just huge movie fans. They go to the cinema all the time, and we thought it would be kind of nice for him to have an opportunity to do this with his peers and, you know, share it with some people in his area. But he does a lot of creative writing, and I can't remember whether we asked him or he asked us, but we came to an agreement early on that before every film, he would write an introduction speech. And so we give him a microphone, and it's just for 5 minutes. And he stands up and he always writes the most amazing speeches, and they're really funny. And they introduce what's going to happen in the film. They tell you a bit about some of the actors, maybe what the director's also directed, maybe some sort of behind the scenes tips, some quotes. They're like really like a highlight of my month is seeing these speeches. And so that's a really lovely thing that everybody that comes really looks forward to that. However, you know, we are aware that some people might not want to come and experience that before the film. So we have on the website that there's a welcome speech at 4:50, and at 5 o'clock sharp, the film's going to start. Even if folk are still coming in or they're a bit late, they'll start bang on time again, just to kind of stick to those expectations and not have people waiting too long. So that's something that we were able to include before the film. Maybe you guys could do similar things, it's up to you, but there are options there. And for the end of the film too, I kind of had these really big plans when I was coming up with the idea of the group to allow for like a discussion at the end, and for it not just being a thing where people rock up, watch the film and then leave without speaking to each other, but that actually we can get together afterwards, maybe with a cup of tea or a snack, and we can talk about the film, and it becomes a bit of a social event, which I was really looking forward to, but actually the audience didn't really want to do that. We just kind of found naturally I was kind of forcing it, and I was asking questions that people just didn't want to answer. And so quite quickly we sort of realized, okay, they don't want this really big formal sit down discussion. And so that's just sort of disappeared for now. Maybe that will change over time. But that could be a really lovely thing if you could also offer a bit of a sort of social event, another kind of aspect of it afterwards. Now we just sort of encourage folk to chat as they leave. So there's a few things there. There's a few more things. I won't go into any more detail about it, but they're just some things that you can kind of pick apart every element of the event and think, well, what maybe can you do? That would be a really good place to start. I'm gonna just rattle through. That was the kind of biggest bit. But next, just to kind of round off these sort of top tips, and then we'll go into having questions and a discussion afterwards, is once you've got your adaptions and some things you'd like to try, practice if possible. It's not always going to be possible. And I know that there's also the distribution fees that you have to pay, which also complicates things for films. But if you can, try and practice with your audience. We were very, very lucky that we were able to work with, if you're a new group, I would recommend linking in with Cinema for All. And they have a scheme called Access Launchpad, which helps new community cinemas get off the ground. And it was Abby and Ellie supported us. I honestly don't know what I would have done without their help. They really helped us get off the ground with thinking about coming at it from a cinema point of view, which I hadn't. I just had no experience of. And they had Access Launchpad, which was kind of specifically for new groups. And there was a small fund to help you to cover the cost of your pilot. So what we did was we had a pilot just for the committee. So we hadn't opened it up to the public. It covered the cost of the distribution fee, so we didn't have to charge them. And we just invited the committee and we practiced everything. And we got their feedback throughout and asked what we should change. And even just personally, it was really useful because I don't know, I'm a planner. And it can be a good and a bad thing. And particularly over lockdown when I was at home planning the film club, because I was kind of stuck at home by myself, I think I went a little bit too far into it. And I kind of over planned for a lot of stuff. And I think I made it bigger than it needed to be at the time. And I kind of wanted to do so many things that actually when it came down to having the pilot, I was just really aware of, well, that's just too much. That either they don't want to do this or they have no interest in this, or maybe this needs to be pared back a bit. So it was really useful. And also just with tech and stuff, really, really useful to have a practice with tech before you're able to go public. And even just if you are making resources and things, to give them a chance of going through them and seeing about the wording, or if it kind of makes sense as you've made it. Almost there. So kind of towards the end of this process, but obviously should be happening throughout, is being open to getting feedback. So thinking about different ways that you can get feedback. So if you're thinking about having a neurodiverse audience, having something that you have to do a lot of reading and writing might not really be that appropriate. So can you get feedback where we had something for a while that it was sort of different faces, and you mark the face that closely reflects your experience. You could have sort of post-it notes. You could have loads of different ways of getting feedback, either after every screening or every now and again. And even, obviously I know a lot of my examples have been talking about screenings, but even if you've got a festival, we run a festival of, it's called the Festival of Celebration, and it's just a yearly kind of week-long festival celebrating the creative talents of the neurodiverse population in East Dunbartonshire. And we have sort of bands playing and an art gallery, and we have an iPad set up with the video on that people can just talk at when they leave if they want. There's loads of different ways of getting feedback, but thinking about how that's possible. We for a while we had a big roll of paper out on a table as people left, and multicolored pens, and we just sort of said to people, you can write whatever you want. You can do pictures, quotes, drawings, actual feedback, criticisms, anything you want you can do on this big bit of paper. And over time, because a lot of our audience is a lot of the same people who come each time, they just stopped doing it. They just weren't that interested in giving feedback after every single movie, which is totally fair enough. Again, that's another thing that I had to sort of be okay with, the fact that they didn't want to draw loads of lovely big pictures and stuff. So I had just said to them a couple of months ago, said, will we just stop doing this? And they said, yeah, we don't want to do that. So that's fine. So now we don't have that anymore. Maybe that'll change over time. We have agreed to do a kind of annual check-in feedback session, but that's kind of the group have helped guide how that works. And then lastly, the kind of link to that, I suppose, is be willing to adapt and change. And it can be difficult if you're really attached to something, or if you spent a lot of time on something, but it's okay if things haven't gone as you hope they were going to go, or if things change, or you might think you've done something that is going to be really, really inclusive for so many people and it actually isn't. You have to sort of remember here that you're not going to get everything right for every single person. That is kind of inherent with what we were talking about of being neurodiverse and everyone being different and having different sort of needs and wants. Some things are going to work. So it's about being flexible. If you have any changes, you can pilot them. They don't have to be permanent, but it's okay if things have to change as they go. Like I said, that woman who called me the other week to talk about her daughter coming and having the rows at the back. That's just a new thing that we're going to try and see how it goes. I think really that's all you can do. And even if it doesn't work, or even if you try something or you realize that you can't do certain things, it just goes a long way to know that you've been thinking about it already and you've already considered it. And I should highlight too, if you are going to make any changes, it can be quite common for some of the autistic community to find changes quite difficult if they're kind of used to knowing what's going to happen. And again, that comes to kind of your expectations being met. So I would suggest if you're making any big changes to try and give them a bit of advance warning, whether that's just telling them or sometimes writing things down can be quite useful so people can go away and take it home and have a bit of processing time. If it's going to be any big changes, I would let them know where possible. But generally, like I say, for us, it wasn't so much of an issue. And for us, it was mostly the changes we made were really me paring things down a bit and taking things out that ended up just being too much, which is a wee bit easier, I suppose. So I've mentioned it's not possible to do everything. I know that was like a big, massive chunk of me just talking. I'm going to stop in a second, but I really don't want you to all be sitting there thinking that I'm saying you should go away and do loads of different things and make sure that everybody always has the most amazing time and you're going to have all the answers, because it's just not really possible. What I'm just asking is that if you just can spend a bit of time having a think about it, and even if you're only able to make maybe one adaptation or one change, you know, that could really be the difference between some people being able to come. You know, even one thing is really, really amazing and really positive. So I'm gonna come out now and have a bit of time for questions. Then we'll have a kind of 5-minute break, and then we'll get you into some groups and hopefully discuss some of this and give you guys a chance to share a wee bit about your experiences that you run, what you do to be inclusive, or what you think you might be able to do over time. And then we'll get back at the end for kind of showing you some of the resources that I've been talking about to hopefully make it a wee bit more practical. But I'll stop sharing for now and just ask, either you can put your hand up or type in the chat. There might be stuff in the chat already. Yeah, I just saw somebody asking about a chance to have a discussion and questions. So here we are now. Does anybody have any questions? Emma?
I'm just wondering about your experience of sort of working with like a sort of hybrid audience in terms of your screenings, whether you tend to find, because it is Spectrum Film Club, that it tends to be neurodiverse people that come to the screening. I suppose I'm just wondering about, in our context, whether it's valuable to sort of create or program screenings that are you specifically kind of market towards a neurodiverse audience, or whether in your experience it's kind of better to, sorry, my dog's whining at me beside me, whether it's better to make it a sort of hybrid, or just make these adaptations so that it's more, you know, your kind of general events are more inclusive to a wider breadth of audience.
That's an interesting question, and almost anybody else can sort of come in with an answer too if they think they want to say anything. But I would say there's arguments kind of for both. I think it can be really useful for a lot of our people. Well, I suppose our people would mainly be autistic, but any sort of neurodiverse person to be able to take part in opportunities for the public and that they want to do and just feel included in. So even if that is a sort of more mainstream event, but maybe it is just saying, well, you can come, anybody can come. If you want, when you arrive, you can have this information pack. And then maybe that's something that just allows them to take part that wee bit easier. But also on the other kind of side of that, there is a real benefit of having sort of specific screenings that mean that people, I don't know, there's something really lovely about seeing our people just really being themselves. And I think a lot of that comes down to the anxiety around maybe attending bigger events and not knowing some of the people. And whereas it's a very safe space. But yeah, I would say there's pros and cons to having both. But again, I think the benefit of having any of these resources or adaptions, being open to any kind of audience can be quite useful. Anybody else can answer if you want.
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether you connected with local kind of pre-existing groups in order to kind of, you were talking about that pilot event, like bringing that audience in the first instance, how you sort of built those initial connections, or were those pre-existing for you anyway?
I was quite lucky, I think, in that respect, that because my job is supporting sort of any autistic people across Eastern Bartonshire, we have a lot of people who we're kind of regularly in contact with, and we work directly with schools, and we work with a lot of community organisations, which meant that we had a bit of a like database, I suppose, of people, and we instantly knew of folk who might like to get involved. So I know that that's not always as easy for everybody, but community working is really important, and we had to do so much of that for this group and our other ones, of kind of asking what's already out there, asking certain people for different skills. I had no idea about how to use any of the tech, and it really stressed me out. And we asked around locally if somebody could offer any support, and it was not someone who I'd personally met, but it was a man. He wasn't really known to us, but he had an autistic son, and he'd seen the group being advertised on social media, and he had loads of, I think his job was in something techie, and just personally for him that had like kind of meant something to kind of volunteer his time. And it was just through having things out on social media, or people kind of noticing things and relying on people being able to share it. But yeah, not everyone is in that position, I suppose. Thanks, Emma. Anyone else?
Hi, can I ask a question? Which may seem like a silly question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Cinema is something that's completely new to me. I was part of Regional Screen Scotland's Cinema in a Year project, and we did 3 pilot screenings at the venue called Howden Park Centre, which is in Livingston. So it's an arts venue. So I'm basically the programmer there, and that's live programming is my background. So we're now kind of looking to add film. Looking at a screening, if it was exclusively for a neurodiverse audience, our auditorium is almost 300 seats. So I can imagine that a full auditorium might just be complete overwhelm for certain people. So would you just cap the audience at a certain amount? What I don't know, what do you think about that, kind of keeping it quieter so that there's more space if they want to move around in this space? I mean, we could easily offer a breakout space. That's not a problem for us. We're lucky enough that we've got the kind of venue, but yeah, just in the actual kind of auditorium itself, what's your thoughts on that?
Thanks, Fiona. Yeah, I would say it would be preferable probably to cap the audience. That's what I know a lot of other kind of inclusive cinema nights do that as well. Just with people, it kind of links back to we were thinking about the sensory experience as well, and just touch and people being really close to you, and especially if you have got somebody who's stimming or talking. We have quite a few people who will talk or make noises during the film. So having kind of separate spaces for people to be able to do that again, and just with their own comfort, can be really useful. Although we found this quite difficult with ours because it's quite a small space, and it's just the capacity is 30. And when that's sort of with all of the seats in, and we found that really difficult at first to kind of think about, well, we want it to be full, and unfortunately we need some money to be able to pay the licensing fee, which a lot of these things comes down to. Luckily we were able to get some funding, which kind of took that bit of a pressure away, but thinking about how much you can reduce it by, and COVID and things, but we're thinking about having distancing. But I would say if you've got a space that could fit 300, hopefully that would allow to have a wee bit more space as well. I would recommend it if possible. It's just the offset of costs and things, which is really, really difficult. Thanks, Fiona. Was that okay?
Yeah. I'm just sorry. I'm just seeing the comment there about kind of being relaxed and open to all, and screenings for elderly people as well. I actually just did a bit of, it was dementia friendly training just a couple of weeks ago, and a lot of things that you're talking about is very, very similar, and just in terms of kind of signage and kind of making things clear, and kind of what to expect, and making staff visible. And so yeah, I think just it was an interesting point that was put in the comments there. Just about there being that kind of similarity, and whether it is just more of a relaxed performance for a bit of a mixed audience, but maybe who have kind of similar needs and kind of support that could be given. Just interesting.
Yeah. No, you're totally right. Thanks for raising that, Siobhan. If folk hadn't seen it, Siobhan had just said about running screenings for elderly people with learning disabilities or difficulties, neurodiverse people, and that, you know, through Siobhan's experience of thinking about having an open cinema event that is actually just relaxed for anybody to come. I think you're right. I think we also, it kind of links back to what Emma was saying as well about wanting to create inclusive experiences, but also it's not always that inclusive to separate people. It's maybe about trying to find that balance. But yeah, hopefully a lot of these resources and strategies we're talking about would also be relevant for other groups and things as well. Anyone else? Don't worry if not, we can also always have a chance for more questions at the very end as well.
I was actually just wondering if Siobhan wouldn't mind going into a bit more detail about relaxed screenings and your experience with the support work. If you're comfortable, maybe even typing it in the comments, that's also fine. Just interested. Thanks.
Hi. I know I perhaps I can include Hannah into this, Hannah from Film Hub Scotland into this. I've certainly done screenings where I've been very clear. We've announced at the beginning that it's absolutely fine for people to get up and leave, and for people to walk around, and for people to, and we play funny films, so encourage people to shout at the screen, and you know, to talk to the screen a bit. In our last event, we had bean bags and fidget toys. And so we didn't, it wasn't, it was certainly not advertised as being neurodiverse. Well, we mentioned it in the notes, but it wasn't like in the headline, but more that it was a relaxed film festival. Tried to just, yeah. But I know cinemas do it very differently, which is, I know that there is a category that's used a relaxed cinema, but perhaps I can see if anybody else in on the screen can perhaps provide some advice about that, because I couldn't clearly.
Thank you.
Thanks, Siobhan. Were you wanting to add anything to that, Hannah? You maybe did a bit of experience with that as well.
I think I mean, so much of it comes down to the resources at the cinema. I know that it's a shame because Nicola Scott from GFT wasn't able to make the meeting today, but they run the dementia friendly screenings and the access cinema and at GFT, and they are separate screenings, but I don't think they're necessarily closed to everybody, even if they are advertised as maybe specifically for a certain group. But again, I think a lot of it just maybe comes down to resource, and a lot of the small changes that you can make are transferable and can cover a wide range of people. So I think it's just working to your means and being able to make these little changes that do allow as many people in as possible. Yeah. And obviously just what your audience is comfortable with as well. That would also maybe come into it.
Can I maybe say something up? Volunteer at GFT at Movie Memories, and also for the access for all screenings, and they are open to general public, but it's also made very clear that they are primarily geared towards dementia friendly screenings or for sort of autism friendly screenings, just so that the whole audience knows what to expect. It's not going to be a conventional screening, so that people are not put off by, say, additional noise or people moving around and stuff like that, because certainly if it's mixed cinema audiences, some cinema audiences can have quite sniffy about people making noise in cinema and stuff like that. So as long as you're clear of what you're intended to show, the more mixed the audience is, I think the better.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks, David. I think you're right. Yeah, and Sophie, or maybe she's gone already. Thanks, David. That was really helpful. And yeah, you're all absolutely right. I think, Matt, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I was just wondering, in terms of, obviously cost is an underlying bane of our lives, but how do you approach ticket pricing, particularly where neurodiverse people will come with family or carers to screenings?
It's a really tricky one. In a dream world, it would just be free. What we do at the moment is, well, to be honest, we've been very lucky. So there are a lot of different funding pots out there. We were able to, we got the cinema equipment was funded through the Cinema Equipment Fund. And then I got some funding for the first year from one of the National Lottery funding pots. And that covered, we have a lot of props. So when you first arrive, there's like a red carpet, and there's a kind of photo booth that you can get your picture taken at, and sensory toys and stuff. So we kind of wanted a lot of those things to be covered, as well as the first year of screening. And that runs out in 2 months. And until today, I'm on annual leave this week, and my colleague texted me today and said, we've just been awarded funding for another year, which was great news, because I was starting to really worry about, well, what happens if we can't make that budget, especially because we've got a really small capacity. And actually, I should say as well, for all that the Spectrum Film Club is really successful in a lot of ways, we don't have a huge audience that attend, I think for a number of reasons, partly because transport. It's East Dunbartonshire. Like I said, the transport is just an absolute nightmare, and to get from one side of the authority to the other, it can just be impossible for some people. Also, word of mouth can be really difficult to make sure the message kind of filters through. So that's what we're working on at the moment, is getting more people. But without the external funding, I don't know if we'd be able to run. What we did do was we've said for people to come, if they can pay £4. We were kind of hoping over time that if that was us at max capacity each time, and it would maybe build up, that that would cover a lot of it. And we say parents and carers go free, but there is a donation box. So we kind of on the table as they come in. So we kind of hope, and some parents are great and will just give like £1 or something each time. So hopefully what we're now is now meant that we can do is, by having a bit of funding to support us, and there are lots of funders out there, I can maybe share some after this, but we are now able to kind of save that £4 each time, so that if there is, say this time next year, when this next year's funding runs out, so the funding today was through the council. The council have a local thing. I should say that although I work for the council, the Spectrum Film Club is an independent group, so it's sort of independently constituted, so it can apply for its own funding. It's totally separate from the council. I kind of see it as being run by the committee, and I'm just there to kind of help move things along. So in terms of funding, I would say look at what's out there. But yeah, we have a small fee just to get a bit of money and say parents and carers go free. I'd be interested, I don't know if anybody else runs similar things, they want to share what they would do. Do you, Matt, what is it that do you run a cinema?
Good technique. Turn the question around. Yeah, no, we support a different cinema, so we support a network of community cinemas, primarily village hall cinemas. So like Fiona was saying, it's quite a diverse audience in terms of social needs, but none of the venues would necessarily have a big enough audience to run a specifically neurodiverse screening. What the venues themselves run pretty much the same as the Spectrum. They have their group that run and organise and determine their own pricing and structures. Some run similar to Emma, who's in our region as well, who's disappeared, chucking a ball for a dog or so. Run a pay what you can afford kind of basis, so a sliding scale with recommendations of what to pay. But if it is somebody that they know, and that's with community cinema, it's quite useful that people tend to know the people in the communities, they know they require a carer or support person to come to the cinema, then they're allowed in free, basically, to encourage the person themselves to be able to come to the cinema.
Yeah, a lot of extra hidden costs for these people. I think if you do need to pay for your support staff or things to go with you, that can be a barrier in itself. That sounds great. Thanks, Matt. Has anybody got any other questions? Ah, yes. It's Hannah just getting right ahead of the game. This is good. If there aren't any other questions for the moment, what I might do is suggest that we just have a quick 5-minute comfort break, to loo, get a glass of water, whatever you need to do, and then we'll come back in about 5. I know 5 minutes isn't that long, but we've only got half an hour left. And then what we'll maybe do is split you into 2 groups, and we'll just have a bit more of a chat, and hopefully you can share a little bit more about your organisations or your events and what you do, and think about what we've been discussing about some strategies and how to be a bit more inclusive. And then we'll come back at the last wee bit to look at the resources before we finish. Is that okay? Cool. I'll see you in about 5 minutes then, if that's all right.
Hannah, can I just speak to you very, very quickly?
Yeah, 2 seconds.
Sorry, but I'm going to interrupt you.
This meeting is being recorded.
Nice. Thanks, Hannah, and thanks to everyone for those discussions. I know that was quite quick, but it was really nice to hear what everybody has been getting up to. Just to mention, in your one you might have had some similar questions, but David had just asked about including the audience within the running of the event, and I was just saying some examples of opening up the Spectrum Film Club if they wanted to help sell tickets, or run the tuck shop, or show people to their seats, or just welcome people. You could just have someone standing at the door saying hello, or setting up or taking things down. It can be really useful where possible to link people in, even if they need a bit of support. I just mentioned as well that there's we also say to our people that if they do want to do it a bit of help out a bit, they can add it to their CV as voluntary experience, even if that's just showing someone to their seat, or even just, I've said it to the guy who does our welcome speeches, put on your CV that you're our compere, and that you can kind of make it really exciting to them that this is a bit of experience. And even if it is just saying hello as they come in the door, that can be really useful to them. And for a lot of people who maybe don't have much work experience or confidence doing these things, you can kind of make it really beneficial for them in other ways too. we kind of cut me off at the end there, but I hope that was okay, David, to answer your question. We don't have long left. What I would quite like to do is just quickly show you the resources I'm going to be sending. And then if you want, for the last couple of minutes, if there's any more questions or anything that came up from your other discussion, you can let us know, just so you get a rough idea of what you're going to be getting in an email. So hopefully you can see these. It doesn't always share that easily. So just to kind of highlight, when I was talking about doing a full event scan, this is kind of what I'd had in mind, and I'll be sending this out. I made all of these on Word, partly because I'm not good at doing any other tech stuff, and also partly because they're really easy to edit. Or I would like to think most people could edit these and find it easy enough to make changes. So we'll send them out, and you can tweak it and change it, and take as much out or in as you want from any of these. So I had mentioned before, kind of, I broke down a lot of these things to kind of think from start to finish your event. There's space at the end, you can add more. Thinking about practically what happens at the beginning, thinking about if that throws up any potential barriers for people, and then thinking about any solutions and adaptations that you could maybe do. And again, this would be maybe useful where you have the list of recommendations that I'll show you a couple that you can kind of sit and maybe just offset a couple that can immediately go in those boxes without you having to spend too much time not really sure where to start. The other things similar to that one, hopefully you can see this, is a similar thing, but thinking about the sensory experience. So I've kept this bit blank, but what I have done underneath is given some examples of some things to think about. So if you're doing a bit of a kind of recce of what happens within your event, also thinking about the kind of practical space and sensory wise, what might come up, some things to think about. And again, you can then think about maybe some adaptations down the line. Another thing I'm going to send, which I just made this kind of last minute, so I don't know if this will be useful or not. You can ignore it if it's not. Thinking about, I kind of thought that I'd made some resources for thinking about the space and thinking about the sort of sensory experience of the space, but not really thinking about the audience of people who might come. So again, on the second page, I've given some examples, and I've given some examples of thinking about maybe an audience of autistic people. You could change this to young audience, older people's audience people who've got dementia, ADHD, anything. Again, this kind of links a wee bit more to if you're doing some research at the beginning, or if you're speaking to people in your audience about things that they might worry about going to the cinema, or things that they've experienced going to the cinema, kind of thinking more specifically about the people and what they might be bringing to the event. So hopefully that will kind of cover the audience and the space and the sensory experiences. Hopefully these are some tools to kind of get you thinking from the beginning. Those are some examples. Again, you can edit it and change it. It might not be useful, but hopefully that covers a few things there. The other last things I wanted to share that I'll send is, here are just some of my tips that I'd sent out when I'd done a kind of shorter version of this training for the Young Audiences Forum through Film Hub Scotland last November, and it's kind of trying to break some things down. So I know we didn't go into loads of detail today about specific adaptations, kind of because I knew we could be here all day talking about all the different adaptations for all the different things, and I knew I'd be sending you these afterwards. So this is just some of my sort of potential barriers and some adaptations. Again, thinking of using this as a tool to kind of help you fill in the information about what you might be able to do within your event. And lastly, I just also want to share, I'm just doing this so you know that they kind of hopefully make a bit of sense when we send them on. Just lastly, just to quickly share with you, hopefully you can see, this is the webpage for the Spectrum Film Club, information about kind of what's going to happen, information about the next film, which is Clueless, information start and finish time, blurb, trailer, and at the bottom here we have some resources that can be opened and downloaded and printed, and the video as well that you can watch there. It does say they take a while to open once you click them. I wish that was different, but I've been told there's not much we can do about it. So if you do go and have a look and a bit of a play around, then stick with it. And the last thing, contact details and things, that's my work email address, but I'll send my personal one with the slides if you wanted to get in touch. And lastly, just this resource that was an absolute godsend for me in developing the Spectrum Film Club. I'm not sitting here going to take all the glory for work that some other people have done. So this was really useful. Again, at the end of the slides, I've given a few different links. So this is included. And this was the resource that was created through the UK Cinema Association and the National Autistic Society. And I want to just quickly share, it's got information about, like I said, this is autism friendly screenings, but it would be useful for any audience, I think. A bit of information about autism, again, doing a bit of research, getting to know who might be coming, some facts and statistics. And then from page, I think it's 14. Here we go. It breaks down kind of what I've been talking about, but in a lot more detail is some adaptations. So here are some potential things for before they come to the film. Here are some potential adaptations for programming, some for older audiences as well. Publishing, booking, getting tickets, again, right through the whole kind of journey of the event. This one's a really, really useful one here for adjustments on the day. And again, there were just things that an example would be after the pilot, some of our audience members complained that there were some people who were making loads of noise with their crisp packets and their sweetie wrappers and stuff, and that there was, I've noticed it quite often actually at some of our events, that maybe it's a thing of just not really realizing that you're making noise, and that might be disturbing for other people. And I didn't know what to do about it. And there was a really brilliant example here that says people can take their own things, but then maybe put things in containers. And so now we have kind of wee plastic bowls, and we say to everybody, right as soon as they arrive, please put your snacks in these plastic bowls before you start. And everybody does it, and there's no rustling packets and things like that. So again, that's just an example. We've got loads and loads of things here that's already done, that you can take things from. So again, that's listed so in the slides. So I'll send on the slides, I'll send on those resources as adaptations, but I just wanted to share with you that those things will be coming, and hopefully an idea of kind of how to use them if you need. And yeah, they're all, well, the things I've made, they're not public, but you can share them, I don't care. And the other stuff's online. Has anybody got any other kind of questions before we finish up? Or any last thoughts? Kind of bang on time.
Just a quick one. You said you've also a lot of good stuff there about things you do, but any major things that you don't, that things to avoid? Sort of don't, that you've tried and just don't work?
That's a good one. For us, it's obviously different for everybody. What we did, I'd mentioned before about having a small capacity, so we just don't have capacity to have loads and loads of people. So what I had originally planned for was, so we didn't turn away loads of people on the day, was that people reserved a space on Eventbrite just to keep track of numbers and how many folk were coming. And we have our regulars who do that all the time, but again, there's the kind of downside of that as well, that was some people not being able to use tech in the same way or have an understanding of using the internet. Thanks Matt. But so what we've now say is, if you can reserve a seat, that would be great, just to give us an idea. So I know that we've got 2 brand new people coming to the screening on Tuesday, so I just know to kind of be ready for new faces or new questions, but also for some people down the line, reserving things online isn't that handy. Also, a thing that we do that I really noticed, we got a lot of feedback about the noise, and I really meant that you'll probably know yourself from watching things at home or the cinema, but it being really quiet and then just going deafeningly loud. So now one of us sits at the back with the sound desk, and when it gets really, really noisy, we'll just quickly turn it down a bit, and then they start talking and we move it up. And it's not ideal. Maybe that, you know, if we had loads of money and, you know, tech experience, there could maybe be something that could do it for us. But that actually really works. We don't have anybody sitting with their fingers in their ears or things like that. So those were kind of big learning curves for us, I think, particularly about getting seats and the noise. But everybody will have their own things, I suppose. But thanks for asking, David. Thanks, Siobhan, for your message. Anything else before we finish? That's good. Like I said, with the slides, I'll send my email address. So please don't be strangers. You know, you can get in touch at any point. We can have a chat about things, or you want to, even if you've got ideas for me that things I should be doing, I'm totally open to that as well. Yeah, always open to learning new things and making new friends.
That's great. Thank you so much, Hannah. Yeah, all I'm seeing in the chat is messages about how useful it's been, and how yeah, people always like having practical tips and things they can take away. So thank you so much for your time this afternoon, and thank you everyone for attending. And yeah, as Hannah says, I will send around all the resources and contacts, and yeah, kind of keep the conversation going. And yeah, Hannah's available. If we're, you know, Film Hub Scotland's always available for any kind of support and advice you need, so we can all keep in contact with our plans as well. And a little plug for feedback for me. So if there's, with all the resources, I'll send through a little link just for any thoughts on the advice, sorry, on the Access forum. And yeah, please do fill that in, and it'll help us come up with new ideas and for future forums, and yeah, any changes that we might need to make, or anything that we're doing great. So please fill that in when it comes around. But yes, thank you so much for attending. And again, once again, thank you, Hannah, for your time.
A quick word before everybody goes, just to remind people about our advice service. This advice service, there's a website that you can, it's a bit difficult to find the website, but you can also email us and we'll give you the website, where you can choose an advisor who can give you half a day's advice with preparation before and follow up afterwards. That's worth at least £250 with some of the great, you know, cinema and programming experts all over the UK. So yeah, we really encourage people to use it. It's not good, we're certainly in its present iteration. It's only continuing till the end of March, so we would like people to use it. So if there's some part of your service that you feel that could be improved by anything, really have a look on the website. It's a really wide range, from technical stuff, audio issues, to disability, to help with funding forms, all of this sort of business plan, pricing, all sorts of things we can provide support on. Yeah, so I'm just giving it a quick plug, and also tell anyone else whom you know in your networks. Thank you.
I'll put the link in the email with everything, so all the information will be there for everybody to have a look at. Great. Well, enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and hope to see you all soon.
Thanks so much, guys. Nice to meet everyone.
Bye.
Yeah.